This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to China Global Television Network. This is The World Today and I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Here are your top stories. UN says at least 16 staff and their dependents have been detained in Ethiopia. Poland tightens its border with Belarus amid a migrant standoff. And Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida outlines his agenda after a strong election victory. We begin the top of the hour in Ethiopia, where several UN staff members and their dependents remain in detention. According to the UN, 16 are currently being detained, while 6 others have been released. They are all Ethiopian nationals. The government has imposed a 6-month state of emergency as rebels threaten to advance on the capital. The conflict first began in the northern Tigray region as government forces fought the TPLF. The UN has condemned the detention of its staff members and called for their release.
There has been, as far as I know, no explanation given to us about why these staff members are detained. There are 16 remaining in detention, and 6 have been released. So that's the breakdown. They come from various UN agencies. They're all national staff. It is imperative that they be released.
It seems that the UN
we've also had the occasion of some staff members to visit some of the staff members in detention.
Well, CGTN's Girum Chala is standing by for us in Addis Ababa and joins us live now with the latest. Girum, what's the latest you can bring us on the detention of these UN workers in Ethiopia?
So the Ethiopian government, Maya, has confirmed the detention of these UN staffers. As the UN officials said, all of them are Ethiopian nationals, although they are working as local staff for the United Nations, different organizations based here in Addis Ababa. The federal police also said that it is going to announce in a press conference, which we're waiting to attend perhaps in the afternoon, according to local time here, Maya. And they are planning to explain as to why these people are now in detention. But we have gathered around, by the way, that these people might be in custody because of perhaps breaching what has been said in the state of emergency, and also what the government is calling the meddling into the internal matters of the nation, or perhaps conspiracy. But these are things that we cannot really verify. These are news that we are hearing from here and there. But for the real and actual information, we're waiting for the press to take place. 6 people have already been released. The others are in jail, still under police custody. The UN is in close contact with the foreign ministry and are discussing a possible way of freeing them from detention, Maya.
And Girum, it's been just over a year since this conflict started in the Tigray region. The UN is now saying that Ethiopia is at risk of falling into a civil war. We do know that the TPLF is now in a coalition with other armed groups. Looking at it, how does the government plan to end this conflict?
Well, let me take you back a little bit, and this is also according to some of the officials we spoke to before this conversation that we are having at the moment. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, when he took power a month or 2 back, delivered a speech, and on that speech he sent out a particular message about ending this conflict. He said that a national dialogue, which is going to be initiated and will be an all-inclusive one, is something that the government and the people of Ethiopia are banking on to resolve the conflict in the north peacefully, using a resource from within the country. That national dialogue is reportedly now under formulation. We don't really know when it's going to take place and who particularly is going to be part of it. There is this tendency of inclusiveness of all parties, including the TPLF leadership and others. But on the other hand, the UN and the European Union, others, including the African Union, as you know, are trying to strike a deal between the two parties by first trying to stop the war, the ongoing war, access roads to humanitarian services to be open, and others. Olusegun Obasanjo, special envoy, former Nigerian president, is engaged today. He is in the northern part of the country trying to do just that. So from the government side, the plan is to cooperate with the African Union and also work on what I've earlier said of handling a national dialogue, which is going to be all inclusive. But we have to wait and see, Maya, if these things are going to hold water.
Girum, thank you very much for that. Girum Chala joining us live there from Addis Ababa. Moving on, Afghan interim government spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid says in the past 3 months, the Taliban have recaptured about 600 members of the ISIS extremist group who escaped from prisons during the fall of the former Afghan government. Mujahid was speaking at a news conference in the capital, Kabul. He added that 33 key members of ISIS have been killed in clashes with the Taliban, and some of the group's leaders have surrendered. Well, for more on that story, we're now joined by CGTN's Zmarialai Abbasin, who joins us from Kabul with more. Zmarialai, what more can you tell us about this news conference from the government spokesman Zabiullah Mujahid?
Hello, Nahia. Well, some points that you already mentioned were the key points by the spokesperson of General Directorate of Intelligence, Khalil Hamra, who said that 600 ISKP members have been arrested since last 3 months in Afghanistan and the takeover by the Taliban, and some others were killed. According to Khalil Hamra, 33 ISKP members or the militants killed during the clashes with the Taliban in different areas, and also some of their key commanders and leaders were also surrendered to the Taliban. At some point, the conference was also joined by Taliban spokesperson and information and culture Deputy Minister Zabiullah Mujahid. He mentioned the visit of acting foreign minister to Pakistan, and also he invited all the Afghan pilots who have already fled the country to join the Afghan Air Force back, those who have been involved in military or the civil aviation authority. According to Zabiullah Mujahid, there is no risk and danger to their life, and they will do their security measures in regard to safeguarding their lives in the country. That's why he invited and called upon all the pilots to come back to the country and serve their own people. It comes after that reports that some of the Afghan pilots who have been detained in Tajikistan, the neighboring country with Afghanistan, and then facilitated and meddled by the United States of America to flee United States of America, and that's very important according to Zabiullah Mujahid, that they should serve the country. On the other hand, the intelligence spokesperson Mr. Hamra added that 72 people have already captured because of the kidnapping in the countries, and almost dozens of people were released, those who've been hostage with all these kidnappers. On the other hand, enlightening the visit of the acting foreign minister Amir Khan Muttaqi and a delegation from the government in Afghanistan to Pakistan, he said this is an important visit, and they will discuss transit, economic situation, and bilateral relation with Pakistani side, along with the other issues that are related to the border. And Zabiullah Mujahid said that the country is far more secure, and the ISKP or Daesh is under control, and the country is not a big threat.
All right, Zmarialai, thank you very much for that. CGTN's Zmarialai Abbasin in Kabul. Thousands of desperate migrants are trapped in freezing weather on the border between Poland and Belarus. The presence of troops from both sides is raising fears of a confrontation. The migrants largely come from countries in the Middle East and Africa and include many children.
We are from Iraq. Yeah. We are from Iraq, and we want to go to Germany, to UK, for better life.
but alive.
Yeah.
And in Iraq is bad.
So bad, so bad. No money, no work, no food.
How many children? How many children?
Well, more than 500 children easily, more than 500. I don't know exactly how many, but too much. So many of them, all families. You know, they got kids. Every family they got 2-3 kids. So that's why we worry about the kids more than ourselves. We worry about if we run out the food and the water, and that will be a big problem. The kids will suffer too much.
Well, the United Nations is deeply concerned about the situation and is calling for immediate and unhindered access to the crowds. European countries have accused Belarus of exploiting the migrants in response to sanctions and encouraging them to cross illegally into the EU, something Minsk denies. Lithuania's parliament declared a state of emergency that allows its border guards to use force to prevent migrants from entering the country, while Poland said it had deployed additional soldiers on its borders. Japan's Prime Minister Fumio Kishida unveiled his new cabinet on Wednesday, with Harvard-educated Yoshimasa Hayashi as foreign minister. His government has begun working on a stimulus package to revive the economy. Phoebe Amoroso has more now from Tokyo.
Hayashi is a former education minister, former agriculture minister, and he is part of Kishida's faction. He's known also to be part of a non-partisan group of lawmakers who are promoting stronger Japan-China relations. And Kishida has come out and said many times that he wants to strengthen dialogue with China, so it's a very logical choice on that front. But it's also a very strategic choice for Kishida himself. Hayashi is known as an ally to the Prime Minister, and some believe he's pushed Kishida to make bolder moves, and may even be one of the reasons why Kishida has risen to leader of the LDP today. Kishida has been promising a very large stimulus package worth around $265 billion. He has a vision which he calls new capitalism, and this is promoting growth as well as distribution. It's really aiming at tackling income inequality. And in order to do this, he has appointed a panel to look at several policy measures, and this panel consists of public and private members. They've made several recommendations just in a meeting this week on Monday. They said that they should focus on key things such as innovation, startups and digital economy, but also economic security. They said that Japan should continue to invest in overseas semiconductor manufacturers, building plants within Japan. And it's likely that there will also be some debate about support for companies. Kishida has said that he wants to give greater support to those businesses who actively raise wages for their workers. In fact, raising wages has been a major promise that Kishida made in his campaign to become leader of the LDP and subsequently Prime Minister. Now, details of this package are expected on the 19th, so we'll have to wait and see exactly how much the spending we will see and exactly how it will be allocated.
And that's it for this edition of The World Today. Our correspondents Girum Chala in Addis Ababa, Naba Mohideen in Khartoum, as well as Chris Ochamringa in Kinshasa are all standing by with news making headlines on the continent. That's all coming up next on Africa Live. Do stay tuned.
This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The UN says at least 16 staff and their dependents have been detained in Ethiopia. Norway, Britain and the US call for restoration of democratic transition in Sudan. And Guinea's interim president rejects appointment of a special envoy by ECOWAS. Hello and welcome to Africa Live. Wherever you're joining us, this is the program bringing you news from all across the African continent. I'm Mahia Mutua in Nairobi. Also coming up, in business, South Africa's finance minister to deliver first medium-term budget speech this week. And in sports, the husband of slain Kenyan athlete Agnes Tirop ordered to take a mental health test by a court. Let's begin in Ethiopia, where we are keeping our eyes on a developing story there. 16 UN staffers are currently being detained, while 6 others have been released. All those being detained are Ethiopian nationals. The country is currently under a state of emergency. The UN has condemned the detention of its staff members and called for their release. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by CGTN's Girum Chala, who's standing by for us in the capital, Addis Ababa. Girum, how have the Ethiopian government and the public reacted to these reports?
Well, Maya, as you've said, the UN staffers, who, by the way, all of them are citizens of Ethiopia, also working for the UN different agencies, are now under police custody. The government is saying that the situation, the matter, is under police investigation, and the police, by the way, here in the afternoon local time, is expected to come up with a press statement or press conference for that matter to explain as to why these UN workers who are Ethiopians are jailed and what kind of process are they supposed to face. At the same time, we know that the public does not really understand as to why these people are detained. So all of us are waiting for the government's statement. But we understand also from police source that we have that as per the state of emergency terms and conditions, these people might be under investigation. But we have to wait and hear from the police side, Maya, and report back to you.
And Girum, what more can you tell us about this latest tension between the Ethiopian government and UN officials, and whether there are any attempts to address this?
Well, there are several issues between the United Nations and the Ethiopian government. As you remember, when it comes to humanitarian services delivery, there were confusions in the first place. And also, when it comes to perhaps the issue of addressing those UN workers who have been sent out of the country because of misbehavior, according to the government, and the UN has been expressing its unhappiness, if you like, several times, including in the Security Council through Antonio Guterres, Secretary General himself. So, and now there is a detention of these workers. In general terms, there seems to be a misunderstanding and unhealthy relationship between the United Nations and the Ethiopian government. The situation, however, according to source that we have from the Addis Ababa side, is that they're trying to iron out all the differences one step at a time. If you remember, Martin Griffin, Undersecretary, top official of UN humanitarian agencies, has been in Addis Ababa just a few days back, spoke to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, also Deputy Prime Minister, and other authorities here to just particularly address issues related with humanitarian situations and also others. So we are expecting in the next few days things to be smoothened out. But then again, we have to, again, wait and see if that's going to be the case or not, Maya.
Girum, great to have you with us as always on Africa Live. CGTN's Girum Chala joining us from Addis Ababa. Well, staying with Ethiopia, the AU's Eastern Africa Special Envoy and former Nigerian President Olusegun Obasanjo has visited Mekelle and spoke with rebel leaders on the possibility of holding peace talks with the federal government. President Obasanjo is currently engaging Ethiopia's regional leaders as he moves to resolve the differences between the warring parties. Here once again is CGTN's Girum Chala with more from Addis Ababa.
Diplomatic pressure keeps on rising on Ethiopia's government and the rebel TPLF group. But of all those mentioned so far, it looks like the African Union's efforts to end the fighting are gaining traction. The AU's special envoy to the Horn, who is also a former president of Nigeria, Olusegun Obasanjo, has already made Ethiopia's top leadership and the heads of the TPLF in Mekelle. Obasanjo later reported back to the African Union's Peace and Security Council calling for an immediate and unconditional comprehensive ceasefire and cessation of hostilities by all parties.
3. Call for immediate and unhindered humanitarian access. 4. Call on the parties to ensure respect and compliance with international humanitarian and human rights laws and practice. 5. Call for an immediate commencement of an all-inclusive national dialogue and reconciliation.
The international community is now banking on President Obasanjo's efforts to broker a peace deal between the federal government here and the TPLF leadership in Mekelle. Already, he has got the backing of the UN, EU, China, Russia, and the United States. President Obasanjo said the withdrawal of troops from held areas is important for all parties.
Tomorrow, I will be paying a visit to Amhara region and Afar region, all in effort to harmonize the views of the leaders in the area of withdrawal of troops from regions that are not theirs, and also in maintaining humanitarian access. All these, I believe, are very important, and they are the areas of priority that most of the leaders that I have consulted with have indicated.
Many say there is light at the end of a tunnel when it comes to bringing the two sides for roundtable talks. President Olusegun Obasanjo has the same view about ending the war in Ethiopia peacefully.
I hope that with the efforts we have in hand, before the end of this week, we hope to have a program in hand that will indicate how we can get the humanitarian and withdrawal of troops all put together to make the immediate demand of the stakeholders.
Until such times of peace talks come, both sides are expected by the AU's mediation team to avoid the escalation of the already bad war situation. Neighboring nations too would like to see the closing of this agonizing chapter of Ethiopian history as soon as possible before it affects the entire Horn. Girum Chala, CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
International pressure is increasing to resolve the political unrest in Sudan. Norway, Britain and the United States have urged the chief of the Sudanese armed forces to restore a democratic government in the country. The three countries made the remarks during a meeting with military leader Abdel Fattah al-Burhan on Tuesday. They've urged Burhan not to act alone, but to go for a civilian-military partnership which will genuinely reflect the aspirations of the Sudanese people. Norway, Britain and the United States also called for the immediate release of all those detained since the coup on October the 25th. They also want the state of emergency to be lifted. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by CGTN's Khartoum correspondent, Naba Mohideen, who joins us on the line. Naba, new developments in this already delicate situation. What's the latest you can bring us from Sudan this Wednesday?
Yes, there is still cautious silence in Sudan and the streets of Khartoum. General al-Burhan has appointed some military generals to review June 30 committee to remove empowerment that was dissolved on October 25th. It was headed or presented by civilians. Now he appointed military generals to review their work. There is some mediation of efforts still going on, like delegations are visiting Khartoum again, like South Sudan delegation, and also Burhan has met with the United Nations Integrated Transition Assistance Mission in Sudan, and he met with Arab League's delegation. There is a judicial sentence to restore the internet service in Khartoum or in Sudan that was shut down after the military takeover on October 25th. But the decision is awaiting approval from the generals and the ruling authority in Khartoum. Also, there is some calls for scheduled civil disobedience on Sunday and Monday, and there is also growing calls for November 13, March of Millions. There is a cautious silence, but expected escalation if a government is formed by the military without going on talks or mediation with civilians or restoring Hamdok to his office.
All right, Naba, thank you very much for those updates. CGTN's Naba Muhyiddin joining us on the phone there from Khartoum, Sudan. In Guinea, military leader Mamadi Doumbouya has rejected the appointment of a mediator by regional bloc ECOWAS. At its extraordinary summit over the weekend, leaders of the Economic Community of West African States appointed Mohamed Ibn Chambas to be the special envoy to Guinea. This in efforts to resolve a crisis caused by a coup on September the 5th. In a letter to the regional bloc, Doumbouya says the appointment of a special envoy does not appear opportune or urgent and is likely to compromise the political transition in the West African country. Doumbouya says the establishment of a transitional body in Guinea is proceeding as planned. He says his government is available for dialogue and collaboration with ECOWAS. Well, for more on this, we're now joined by Achike Chude, who is an African affairs analyst based in Lagos. Achike, thank you for joining us. Why are we seeing the continued rejection of ECOWAS envoys there?
I think it is obvious that the psychology of the coupists, their ideological orientation or compass, their objectives are at variance with those of the ECOWAS. Obviously, there is no agreement on the issue of democratization, no serious agreement on the transition. Committee. There's no mutual agreement on a timetable to return to civilian rule. And even if there was, in some of these countries, it is very clear that the military adventurers are not comfortable with it. They want to run their show. They are interested in power for the sake of power. And so ECOWAS is becoming an irritant in the whole process. It's interfering with their own game plan. I think that is just what the whole thing is all about. That's why and of course they have seen a weakening of ECOWAS essentially, that they can do these things and they get away with it. So obviously the idea that ECOWAS has, its objective for democratization of these countries are at variance with that of with those of the military putschs. That's why they are beginning to see a rejection of ECOWAS envoys.
And looking at the wider picture then, what are the implications of this rejection on dispute resolution efforts in the region?
Oh, the implications are wide ranging and quite serious. Because the reality is that ECOWAS is no longer seen as being quite authoritative when it comes to, in terms of the intervention in these other countries. That they are in a position to now dictate the pace to ECOWAS means it's a weakening of ECOWAS's stand and credibility. And so what it means is not just that, it reduces the ability of ECOWAS when it comes to conflict resolution, but it also empowers other people, other militaries in other parts of West Africa to also do what others have done without much punishment coming, their way. And in the past, I have talked about what, seeming incentivization of some of these coupists. They stage a coup, they remove legally constituted government in their countries, and then they are part of the process bringing these same countries back to democracy. So it will seem as if instead of them being punished for the actions they have done, it would seem as if that they are being incentivized by the agreement that ECOWAS has with them, and that has strengthened them.
Achike, thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. Achike Chude, African Affairs Analyst, joining us live from Lagos. Moving on, the 4th China International Import Expo is wrapping up in Shanghai. This year's Expo features 6 business exhibition areas, including agricultural products, automobiles, healthcare products, as well as trade in services. At least 500 global companies, including those in Africa and industrial leaders, attended the event. While opening the Expo, President Xi Jinping said China will remain resolute in making economic globalization more open, inclusive, balanced, and more beneficial for all. Well, CGTN's Chen Tong is in Shanghai and has been covering the event for us. Chen, the final day is here. What are the highlights you can bring us?
Well, I have some figures to share with you. More than 3,000 companies from 127 countries and regions have been attending at the Expo. And among them, 62 companies debuted 123 new products at the Expo. Well, and we have also the value of the total deals signed at Expo hit more than $70 billion US. And because of the pandemic, we had the very first online country exhibition where 58 million visits have been paid on the online exhibition, where 60 countries and international organizations have been attending the online exhibition. So definitely there are many highlights this year at the 4th China International Import Expo, Mahia.
And Chen, how has Africa been represented at the event?
Well, African countries have been playing a very important role over the past weeks. We have seen African products such as coffee, tea, and honey showcased at the Expo. And because of the pandemic, there are not many African countries and foreigners from Africa who can make a visit to Shanghai. But I can tell you countries such as Mauritius, Congo, and Uganda have been attending the Expo very actively over the past week. And the Chinese consumers has already showed their interest in buying these African products. And we don't have exact figures showing the amount of trade between China and African countries made during the past week. But I can tell you the potential for the trade between China and Africa is expected to get larger in the future.
Chen, thank you very much for bringing us those updates. Chen Tong in Shanghai on the sidelines of the 4th China International Import Expo. Well, it's time for us to take a break. Here's what's coming up. Lawmakers in DRC say over 1,700 killed by armed groups in Ituri and North Kivu since the government declared martial law. And millions are facing climate-induced famine in Madagascar. Welcome back. Now turning to the DRC, where a group of lawmakers representing North Kivu province claim civilian deaths have increased since the government declared martial law. President Felix Tshisekedi declared martial law in the North Kivu and Ituri provinces in May. The members of parliament claim in a report that over 1,700 civilians have been killed by armed groups since the declaration. The report covers both Ituri and North Kivu provinces. It was published 2 days after rebels attacked and took control of 5 villages in the east. The army blamed the attack on the rebel group M23. The North Kivu lawmakers are urging Congolese to demand better protection from the government. Well, CGTN's Chris Ochamringa is in Kinshasa and has been following up on this story for us. Chris, what more can you tell us about this report?
Well, these lawmakers released this 800-page report titled Yotama, and they're saying that they have documented killings in Ituri and North Kivu province from 2018 until now, and they're saying that there are more than 2,000 people who have been killed within that period. But most of the attacks against innocent civilians have been happening after the government declared the state of siege, the martial law that was declared. Basically, the government decided to replace all civilian authorities in Ituri and North Kivu with military officers and the police because the killings of civilians had increased. Now, these lawmakers are saying that there are more than 1,700 people who have been killed in that region after the government declared the martial law, and they're saying that the martial law has had no effect of ending the killings of civilians. They want the government to lift it and, continue strengthening the, efforts to protect the civilians in the DRC. The MPs also said that it appears that these killings are targeting a particular tribe that is predominantly found in Beni, Butembo, and parts of Goma, the capital of the provincial North Kivu province. This is a tribe known as the Nande, and the MPs come from that ethnic group. They have been saying that most of the killings are happening there. The government, the DRC government, has blamed these attacks on the Allied Democratic Forces, although the MPs declined to state that. They're saying they're not sure who exactly these fighters are who have been killing their people, and they're calling on all Congolese, to kind of rise up and demand for the protection of civilians from the government, which is the core mandate that the government has. Mahia?
And Chris, obviously damning claims coming out of this report, but do we know how the government has reacted to it?
Well, the government, first of all, expressed its condolences to all the people who have lost their loved ones in eastern DRC. And they said that they are doing their very best to ensure that they end the killings of civilians. The government also the army spokesperson in Goma recently issued a press conference saying that they have already retaken control of 2 of the areas that were captured by rebels on Sunday, and they have blamed this attack on a rebel group known as the M23. This is a group that, was defeated by a joint force of the UN and the DRC government in 2013. It fled to Uganda. They were given shelter in Uganda, but they were repatriated later on in 2019 and have been in those areas where the Congolese army says the rebels have taken over. Now, the government has also urged people to be a little bit patient with them because they're saying this conflict that they're fighting is not a conventional warfare. It is a guerrilla war, and most of the fighters hide among the community members, sometimes use children, women as human shields, which makes it very difficult to fight against. And so they're saying they are strategizing and doing everything possible to ensure that they stop the killings of civilians in eastern DRC. But to the ordinary people there, the government has failed to protect them. I mean, people are losing their loved ones on almost a weekly basis, and so the government's response to them is not adequate, to soothe them of all the losses that they have incurred so far. Mahia?
All right, Chris Ochamringa from Kinshasa there. Thank you very much for speaking to us on Africa Live. Moving on, more than 1 million people are facing the first climate-induced famine in Madagascar. The country's environment minister says the island nation is suffering as a result of the behavior of rich countries. The minister was speaking at the Climate Change Summit in Glasgow.
Madagascar is suffering from a climate change-induced famine. Droughts have hit farms across the southern part of the country. The island nation has not had consistent rain over the past 4 years, placing thousands of people in the most extreme stage of food insecurity.
The situation is critical and the forecast in terms of rainfall is not good. So the famine faced by 1,300,000 people persist. And as I said, in terms of rainfall, we had 450 millimeters of water expected, which is the equivalent of only 1 month of rainfall in a year.
The disaster is a result of the planet's heating up by carbon emissions.
This situation strongly affects the biodiversity of Madagascar, which represents 5% of the world's biodiversity. And in a political vision to protect 30% of the biodiversity by 2030, Madagascar is at the heart of this commitment and is also a country solution.
Speaking at COP26, Madagascar's Minister for the Environment says the failure of rich countries to meet a $100 billion climate finance target means her country cannot afford to build a water pipeline to alleviate the island's worst drought in 40 years.
Although the state has started its adaptation projects with its own funds, it is clear that the question of financing is crucial. To rebuild the territories that will be below sea level, to face a massive desertification that is taking place in the south of Madagascar, to prevent these populations from moving elsewhere and destroying Madagascar's unique biodiversity, the baobab, the lemurs that are endemic symbols of Madagascar's uniqueness in the world.
The COP26 conference has been able to give voices for nations like Madagascar a platform they might not otherwise have. Madagascar has called for climate solidarity in efforts to adapt and mitigate climate change. Noktula Shabalala, CGTN.
And we'll be checking in on all the latest in business here on Africa Live. Here's what's coming up. South Africa's finance minister to deliver first medium-term budget speech this week. And Tunisia holds an energy meeting looking at impact of fuel price hikes on state budget deficit.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis,
Cairo,
Juba, Johannesburg, Ethiopia,
Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Right, it's time for the business here on Africa Live. South Africa's Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana will deliver his first medium-term budget speech this week. Economists say the minister, who took over from Tito Mboweni a month after the July unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and parts of Gauteng, will probably give more clarity on how South Africa's economic prospects have improved since the start of the year and whether those gains can be used to cast a wider social safety net. Mboweni last updated the public on the condition of the state purse in February, when the main budget revenue was projected to be 25.3% of GDP in 2021-22. Since the 2020 budget review, which was delivered before COVID-19's economic onslaught, the budget deficit had doubled and the in-year revenue shortfall was estimated at $14.1 billion. CEO of South Africa's Estate Agencies Affairs Board says the body is investigating allegations of racism in the property sector amid reports of aspiring tenants being denied access to rented accommodation because of their race. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has the story.
Racism in the property sector was highlighted by a black tenant recently when he was told that a landlord wouldn't accept a black person as a lease or rental tenant. His social media post went viral. The state agency board sprung into action.
He has brought a very critical issue to the fore that we think is merits a full investigation from the State Agency Affairs Board. And last week, I dispatched a team to Cape Town to speak not only to the complainant but to also speak to the agents.
Racism of any form is illegal in South Africa, and this includes taking mandates from landlords which exclude any race from renting or buying a property. The State Agency Board has the power to impose fines.
We have said that we are going to investigate the matter further, but it doesn't excuse the principal from liability, because they need to make sure that whoever reports under them, whether it's a full status agent or an intern, that person complies with the legal requirements of this, with the legal requirements of the laws of this country.
The incident has opened up a can of worms, and it appears from the public reaction to the tenants' posts that there's widespread racism in the rental property sector.
We made a decision that we're going to have public hearings, in terms of which people will be allowed to come to the EAB and to publicly come and speak about their experiences. Because in certain instances, it may not be as overt as was in the case of the gentleman in Cape Town, but there may be situations where there are undertones of this kind of behavior.
The investigation and hearings will also include industry operators and the associations that represent them.
So we're also going to ask them to come and account and explain why it is that their members would be perpetuating such a practice, and do they have any knowledge of such a practice? And if they don't have any knowledge of such a practice, then they need to join hands with us as the regulator to make sure that their members are educated and that any instances of such practices being undertaken are immediately reported.
Tenant racism is prevalent in Cape Town and Gauteng, and the investigation and hearings are a good first step to getting this matter dealt with. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Tunisia must invest in renewable energy as the world moves away from using fossil fuels. These are some of the recommendations coming out of a forum on governance in the energy sector that the country is hosting in its capital, Tunis. The forum is also looking at the impact of fuel price hikes on the state budget deficit. CGTN's Adnan Shawashi with that report.
The National Company of Oil Distribution says prices of energy products in Tunisia are increasing, while access to the distribution market remains under license.
The import of fuel is monopolized by one state-owned company. This situation causes distortions that affect both the state budget, the purchasing power of citizens, and an increase in factor costs for Tunisian companies, while the cost of investment is very high. The reality of the national and international markets is different from domestic oil prices.
Energy experts at the Syndicate Chamber of Oil Distribution Companies know that the Tunisian energy market is not attractive compared to other African countries similar to Tunisia, which are not hydrocarbon producers.
Tunisia's energy market is 100% administered by the state, not only at the price level but also at the margins. The margins are around $25 per cubic meter, while the country that comes next is at $45 and around $150 in Morocco. Despite Tunisia's potential in terms of infrastructure and margins, we are ranked almost last in terms of foreign investment because our market is not attractive.
According to the Ministry of Energy and Mines, 97% of Tunisia's electricity is generated from fossil fuels, mainly natural gas. Only 3% of Tunisia's electricity is generated from renewables, including hydroelectric, solar and wind energy.
Tunisia has set a target to meet its 30% of electricity needs from renewables by 2030 and produce 3,800 megawatts. We started with 500 megawatts from renewables. This is the first step to achieve the national objective of improving the energy mix and reducing the high cost of hydrocarbons.
The Tunisian government has announced that after a delay of several months, the first photovoltaic power plant in Tozeur, southern Tunisia, is finally operational. Its official inauguration will take place in early 2022. Tunisia's oil and gas production covers less than 40% of its needs. The difference is covered by imports. The unpredictability of fuel prices at the international level weighs in on the state budget. The 2021 budget was drafted on the basis of $45 for a barrel of oil, while the current price is over $80. عدنان شواشي CGTN تونس.
And it's time for the sport here on Africa Live. Let's dive right in. A Kenyan court has ordered the husband of slain Kenyan Olympian Agnes Tirop, who's been arraigned on suspicion of her murder, to undergo a mental health test before entering a plea. On Tuesday, the court in Iten ordered 41-year-old Ibrahim Rotich to undergo the test, which he will do on November the 16th. Tirop was found stabbed to death in her home in the Rift Valley town of Iten on October the 13th, in an incident that has shone the spotlight on violence against women in Kenya. Rotich was arrested the following day in the coastal city of Mombasa, with police saying he had been trying to flee the country. Tirop smashed the women-only 10-kilometer world record in Germany this September and won bronze medals at the